Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining EDPNC's series on mastering global expansion. This is our third in the series. If you've missed the first couple, we will be able to send you a link to the recording and to the notes. Today, the topic is evaluating international distributors. Zach Selch, who is the international sales consultant leading North Carolina companies through this journey, has covered kind of an overview of creating a strategy around international sales and distribution partners or other types of partners. Last time we dug into identifying an outreach to distributors. And then after Zach gives newcomers to him and this series a short introduction, then he is going to dive into today's topic, again, evaluating international distributors, and we'll make sure that you know about the follow-on topics as well. We're very pleased to bring Zach, his expertise to North Carolina companies. I have had the opportunity to meet Zach at international trade shows. He ends up part of the U.S. Commercial Service Pavilion at times, and is always advising companies everywhere he goes, very generous with his time. So without further ado, Zach, please take it away. I will remove my background screen while we switch over to your presentation.
Great. Hi. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Melissa. I hope, and can you guys all see my slides, Melissa?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna jump right into this. Welcome. Like Melissa said, we will be getting you notes at the end of this, so you can focus. You don't necessarily have to write. The notes are pretty good. If you've missed previous sessions, feel free to reach out to Melissa or to reach out to me, and we'll get you notes or a recording of those as well. And then I'll just sort of jump right into this. I apologize. I'm not in my office today. I'm actually on the road on vacation, so I'm in a hotel. If it's a little bit noisy, I apologize for that, but we'll do the best we can to get through this, right? So, let me start with this. If you've been in the other presentations, you'll know a little bit about what I like to say. Okay, there are three ways to grow international sales. We can grow your total addressable market. And by that, I mean, we're going to find the right markets for your product. We're going to find the right partners in those markets, right? We are going to increase the sales hours. And that's both by finding the right distributors, but also getting distributors who give you the right sales hours. And probably the number one problem that I hear from people who have been doing this for a while, people who've been doing this for 10 or 20 or 30 years, everybody feels that some percentage, maybe as much as 3/4 of their partners, are not giving them enough sales hours. And when you can increase sales hours, you can increase sales. So one of my big focuses is to try and drive up sales hours and to increase the salesperson competency. Okay. And what I mean by that is very often we're going to hire salespeople. Now, they might be really, really good at selling something, but they might not be really good at selling my product. So the more I can get them competent at selling my product, the more they're going to sell. And there's really, really direct correlation here. If I can increase my sales footprint by 20%, I'll increase my sales 20%. If I can increase my sales hours by 20%, I'll increase my sales by 20%. If I can increase competency by 20%, I'll increase sales by 20%. So my whole focus is to try and do this type of growth. And just I always say this is my least favorite part of the whole conversation, but I have to sort of introduce myself every time I talk because very often I'm going to tell you things that go totally against what other people have told you. And that's fine. There are a lot of different opinions on this. There are a lot of different ways of looking at it. I have basically been in the purchase order business for 35 years. And I like to say there are a lot of people out there who are a little bit more academic or who come from a diplomacy background or they're professors. I have been selling for 35 years. I've onboarded 1,400 distributors. I've sold in 135 markets. I have 125 quarters of beating quota and over $1 billion in purchase orders. So what I talk about is extremely practical, tested. These are things that have worked for me and for my clients all over the world. So you don't have to do them, but I figure it's worthwhile listening for 90 minutes, even if what I'm going to say might be a little bit different from what you've heard from other experts. Okay. And where we want you to be is selling in all the correct markets with engaged, competent, and accountable distributors, and using a systems and a cadence of accountability that runs growth. Okay. We're not going to touch really the markets right now. We're not going to really touch the systems and the cadence of accountability today. We're going to focus on this engaged, competent, and accountable distributors. And I always like to say, I'm not talking about distributors. I'm talking about engaged, competent, and accountable distributors. So we want to be looking at our distributors and not just saying, okay, this guy will work with me. That's great. We want the best people in the market. And that's where this evaluation comes in. Okay. So today we're talking about distributors. I like to say that there are 3 components of a distributor. Okay. There's competency, there is engagement, and there is bandwidth. Okay. And think of this as a triangle. If you only have 2 of those and you have none from the other third, the whole thing will collapse, right? You can't just have 2 lines in a triangle. It's not a triangle. You can't have 1 line in a triangle. You can't have one that is enormous and the other 2 that are tiny. It won't exactly work. Okay. So you need to have a balance of these 3 components: engagement, competency, and bandwidth. That's what you are looking for. And I'll talk a little bit about what each one of these mean. If you picture a graph like this, with competency being on the Y and engagement on the X, and the size of the distributor, the bandwidth being the size of the bubble, okay, when you drive up engagement, you will then drive up competency. You want to start with a basic level of competency, but you can drive up and improve competency when you build up engagement. The more engaged a distributor is, the more willing they will be to learn from you and to improve their competency. I like to say it is very difficult to change bandwidth with a distributor. So you want to make sure that when you hire a distributor, you are hiring a distributor with the right level of bandwidth. And the last thing you want to do is do this randomly. And we do this randomly way too often. And I don't mean that as an insult, but virtually every client I ever work with, when I start off, about half or maybe 80% of their distributors they've chosen randomly. And when you take a look at the overlap between poor performing distributors and randomly chosen distributors, there's a huge overlap. So the more intent you use at choosing distributors that fit your ideal distributor profile, the more likely it is that that distributor will perform, that distributor will be engaged, competent, and accountable. Okay. So let me tell you a few horror stories about bad distributors that I've seen. I had a client once a few years ago, and they had taken this guy who was the son of a family that owned about 20 donut shops, and they were from a foreign country. I don't have to go into the details, but there are parts in the country where some restaurants are owned a lot by immigrants from certain countries. And so there was this young man in his 20s who was very rich. His family owned 20 donut shops. and he wanted to be a distributor of medical products in his family's traditional homeland. He wanted to move back and run a so this manufacturer knew him. They said, well, he's rich, his family's very competent, he'll probably be a good distributor. But he had no connections. He really didn't even speak the language very well because he had grown up in California. And suddenly he's moving to Asia and running a distributorship, and he was just awful. And they couldn't figure out why. When I talked to people, they said, but his family's so successful and they're from that country that he should be really a good distributor, right? This is probably very, very common. Anybody, I'm sure, who is dealing with distributors, you have a distributor who is a golf buddy of your boss, right? I once inherited four. And they all said to me, hey, Zach, you can't fire me. I've been playing golf with your boss for, since the 70s. Since you were a baby, I've been playing golf with your boss. And I fired all of them. But this is a type of thing that very often happens. We become very, very friendly with our distributors, and we don't care if they're producing, and we think, well, they're a nice guy. They, have a good par or whatever. And so we get stuck with people because we have a good relationship with them, even if they aren't producing. And this is very common. I don't know how common this one is, but I like this story. I was working once with a company, and their distributor in one of the biggest markets in the world, Brazil, had absolutely no business experience. And I went down to talk to her, and she had this little office, and she had no other principal she was working with, and she had really made very few sales. It turns out that she was an interpreter, and the head of sales had traveled down for a trade show, and this woman had been her interpreter. And over the course of the few days they had been together, the interpreter had said, hey, could I be your distributor in Brazil? And the woman thought, well, this is a fantastic idea. She speaks English. She's learned a little bit about my product. She could make a great distributor. But she had no connections. She had no business. She had no office. She had no capital. She had no experience selling. And so she didn't sell anything. And this company did no sales for years because they had this woman in place who really had no good reason to have been selected as a distributor. And one other thing I'll talk about is from the flip side of that, sometimes you get a giant distributor, right? And you go in and you say, wow, I just signed the biggest distributor in Saudi Arabia. This is going to be fantastic. But they're carrying 2,000 or 3,000 products. They don't have really time for you. You don't represent anything. That you represent a 50th of 1% of their overall revenue. So they don't really do anything for you. They're not willing to give you any time or energy or anything like that. And this is a big mistake too. I see this a lot. A lot of people will say, wow, I signed up the biggest distributor in Germany. I signed up the biggest distributor in Saudi Arabia. And they're very happy with it, but it doesn't really get them anywhere. And that's a very common mistake. So these are some of the horror stories that I see with people who get distributors. Now, what does a good distributor look like? And I always use an example of probably one of my better friends, best distributor I've ever worked with. So this is a guy who came from, I'm not going to say poor background, but definitely blue collar, middle class type of background. He went to school, he became an engineer. He started selling for a large international manufacturer. He did that for about 5 years. He was a top performer in his country for a large international manufacturer. And then he decided that it was time to open up his own business. So basically, you could say he and his wife, I like to say they sort of lived off of ramen and worked really, really hard for years to get this business going because it's hard to start a business. And they worked hard, and then he got more and more principals, and he sold more and sold more. And now he has this distributorship. He actually ran for parliament in his home country a few years ago. He is on the board of a couple of really nice, large charities. And he's just a phenomenal producer as a distributor, right? And he's built up a generation of young people who he's trained and mentored right? And that's a perfect distributor. That's the guy you want, right? Or the woman you want. There are women like that too. So you want to find people like that. And typically, like I said, they started out working for somebody else, for maybe for a large corporation. And then they have their own company. They're mentoring young people. They're bringing in salespeople. They're covering a reasonable number of lines, not 1,000, but maybe 8 or 10. That's the person you want, right? And that's what we're looking for. Okay. Now, we had a whole session on finding the right markets. But let's touch on that very briefly, right? Are you dealing with the right markets and do you have the right, say, overlap or the right structure of the country that you are in and the distributor that is covering that country? Okay. And that's pretty important too, because very often you find somebody and they'll say, well, I have this distributor and he's Swedish, but he's covering France for me. And then you have to think about that. Now, I'm not saying it's not a good way of doing it, but you should always think why that is. So for instance, a French company that covers Belgium, that makes perfect sense. Sometimes a Belgian company covering France, again, language and culture are very similar. That makes sense. But I've also seen this whole thing where very often you have a distributor who is living in Portugal and he's covering the Middle East. Okay. And then you have to sort of think about why that makes sense. Does it make sense? That country distributor fit and also where exactly you draw the lines, because a distributor will very often, especially bad distributors, will very often say, oh, I would like to cover all of Europe, or I would like to cover 6 countries. You want to evaluate carefully if that is a good fit. If they have the bandwidth, if they have the cultural capacity. If you think about it, you could say maybe Spain and Portugal make sense. Maybe the 4 countries of Scandinavia make sense to lump together. Maybe 6 countries in the Caribbean make sense to lump together. But usually there has to be a really good culture understanding why culturally or geopolitically we're attaching countries together into one distribution contract. And you want to be able to think that one through and evaluate it. So when people talk to you, you can say, well, why do you want to sell in both Italy and Germany? What sense does that make? Is there a reason? And now I've had people say to me, look, I'm Italian. I have this market and I have a partner who's German and he lives in Germany and we work together and we share our operational side. So it makes sense. And an explanation like that does make sense, right? But you want to sort of evaluate that and you want to understand why this makes sense when you are giving people access to a market, especially a market that could be this big. Now, we talked before about what the ideal distributor profile is, and this is a term I use a lot. I've covered this in a few other sessions and really gone into it, but when we're talking about evaluation, again, it's very important that you have this clear, okay? You build this up, and I'll dig into this a little bit in a second. You build this up through the competencies you expect from this distributor, right? The bandwidth you expect from this distributor, and the activities and so on. Okay, so what are some of these things? Well, are they familiar with the purchasing personas, the people who buy, okay, the call points? So as an example, let's say you're dealing with food processing equipment and the people that you're selling to are specific people who work in food processing companies. Okay, so is this distributor, does he call on those people right now? Right? Does he know these people? Is he comfortable working with them? Does he understand the decision-making unit that is used? Now, in hospitals, I've had manufacturers say to me, well, I have a distributor and he calls on hospitals. That's great. But a hospital has dozens of units and they all operate independently. So if you are selling to radiology, you need somebody who is calling on radiology. If you're selling to emergency, you need somebody who's calling on emergency. And it's really important for you to be able to work that out and make sure that they understand the right decision-making unit and that they call on those people and they're comfortable working with them. Now, that sometimes that's just even a matter of mindset. Okay. If they're not comfortable with people who say install products, imagine a widget or a product that you make that gets installed in a building as that building is being built. The process of thinking that through is very, very different than the process of a fast-moving consumer good, even if it's business-to-business type of fast-moving consumable, right? So you want your ideal distributor profile has to include that. Are they comfortable selling to your decision-making unit? Do they call on your decision-making unit? Is this something they're doing today? Okay. Now, I like to talk about the customer, the consumer's path, right? And when you have a customer's path, that is the way that the customer wants to buy. Could be tenders. It could be that they buy very informally, right? It could be very informal how the customer likes to talk to the rep and make a purchase right there. So when you understand how the customer buys, you understand how the distributor should sell. And is that distributor comfortable selling that way? Okay. And that's a very important element of how we work, right?
How's that?
Okay. I like to talk about, I build up a sales process map when I'm building up. When I'm building up, excuse me, I'm in a hotel here. I'm sorry. There are people yelling in the lobby. When I build up my ideal distributor profile, I'm building up the sales process map, right? And I like to say there are four main big components. There's finding the customers, there's building trust, there's helping the customers internalize that we can solve their problem, and there's delivery. And for every product, these are all different. And I want to understand, well, how are we going to find customers? And very often, from my perspective, I want the distributors to know the customers and have trust with the customers I want to work with. But for some products, that's impossible. If you're selling to 5 million, if you have 5 million potential customers in a country, chances are your distributor isn't going to know all of it. But if you're selling to 100 hospitals, chances are he does. So it really depends on the product, but you want to have a good map of the distribution of the sales process before you begin, because that map is then going to give you the parts of the sales process that will help build that ideal distributor profile, right? And I'm just sort of building up here. You've seen this. If you've been to my previous sessions, you've seen this before. So you have the entire map of all the different components, right? And this will build up the competencies. This will identify the competencies that you want from the distributor, okay? Is a distributor responsible for finding customers, for finding the leads in the market? Is he responsible for the introductions, for the outreach, all this? This will show you what he needs to do well. And this will include operational issues. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but I haven't really touched in previous times about things like delivery and payments. But in some areas, in some products, the distributor being able to deal with this delivery, installation, service is extremely important. So you have to identify that from the beginning, and you have to be clear in your mind what is important. And then, of course, bandwidth. Now, I talked about this in one of the previous sessions about calculating bandwidth. If you weren't in the previous sessions, reach out. We can send you the notes from that previous one. But I like to calculate exactly what my expectations of bandwidth are for every market that I want to go into. And what do I mean by bandwidth? Well, how many hours of active sales activity do I expect from my distributor to get the goals that I want? Okay, and this is really important because you can sign up a distributor, and if he doesn't do anything, it doesn't do you any good. And I can pretty much guarantee that as soon as he increases his hours, your sales are going to increase by almost exact correlation. If he doubles his hours, your sales are going to double. If he increases his sales hours by 25%, your sales are going to increase by 25%. So if you start off without enough bandwidth, your sales will never catch up going forward. So you want to know what that bandwidth is. Now, if you're selling let's say you're selling to oil wells in Dubai, right? There's a finite number. And maybe what you only really need is a rep with 2 or 3 people on their team. But if you're selling the same product in Saudi Arabia, you might need 20 times as much bandwidth, right? Because it's so much bigger in terms of reaching out and getting to people. So you have to think carefully what that bandwidth requirement is for every market, because now we're starting out, of course, today we're talking about evaluation. If you don't know what you're evaluating, you can't evaluate it right. So now we've talked about the competencies, we've talked about who they need to know. We've talked about their bandwidth. Okay. And just a couple of rules of thumb, which I mentioned in the previous session. It's hard to judge engagement. It's very hard to change bandwidth. If you start with a distributor who has poor bandwidth, it's virtually impossible to get them to grow. Okay. The ability to increase competency is more important than actual competency. If you talk to somebody and they have a fair amount of the competency you need, but you can see that they could learn more and they're willing to learn more, that's more important than somebody who is really competent, but you don't think he's willing to learn more, invest more time in learning, or that kind of thing, right? That willingness to learn more is really, really important. Okay. Once we've built this picture, we probably have a good idea of what they should be selling today. And I talked about this in terms of finding, but we can use this in terms of evaluating. Okay. Very often somebody will reach out to me. And again, as I've mentioned, I do not really like dealing with people who reach out to me, but I don't take it off the table completely. More importantly, very often my clients will come to me and they'll say, look, I have these 5 people who have reached out to me. Can you evaluate them? And the very first thing I always ask them is what they're selling today. Okay. Because if they're a distributor, they're selling something. And when I look at the brand names that they're selling today, I can understand if they're a good fit to our ideal end user, right? Are they selling to the decision-making unit that I want to sell to? Are they selling at a price point that my product has? Are they selling at a quality point my product has? Now, I'll tell you this: if they are selling a product by a large company that I know has a fantastic sales organization, then I know that somebody has vetted them and somebody's happy with them, right? That is a fantastic testimonial from the start. And if I can just call that company and get a reference, then I'm very comfortable. Okay. Understanding who they're selling is very important like that. Now, if they reach out and the only companies they're selling are, say, Pakistani products, right? Nothing against Pakistan, but usually I'm selling products that have a brand that indicates a higher quality. So I don't necessarily want to go with a distributor that's only selling products that have been manufactured in the developing economy. Okay. So those are the type of things. What they're selling today is probably the very most important thing and the fastest way of evaluating a distributor who I'm talking to. Give me your product line. What are you selling today? And that said, I'll also say about half the time when I say to somebody, what are you selling today? They don't want to tell me. Or they will come up with a story that goes, well, we sell. I've had people in the past 2 weeks, I've had people say to me, "Oh, I'm selling hundreds of products. I'm selling so many products. I couldn't possibly list all the products I'm selling, right?" And that I don't believe, right? Yeah, if they're selling hundreds of products and they don't want to talk about a specific one, then they probably don't have a contract with anybody. And what they're doing is they're trying to resell products that they don't have an agreement on. And I don't want to work with people like that. Right. So, and now there could be a case where somebody says, look, I have for some type of a reason, I've told my principal that I won't tell people that I'm selling this product. I'll walk through a discussion like that. I won't discount somebody just because of that. But if somebody says, "Oh, I can't," I'd love to tell you what I'm selling, but I'm selling so many different products. We could talk for hours about it. Let's not waste time on it. Something like that usually is fishy. Now, you talk to a good distributor, and you say, "Tell me what you're selling," and they will name their three top lines like that, and they will probably say, "And you can call." Joe and Bob and Jane, who are the VPs of sales of those companies, and they will each give you a great testimonial and tell you that they love working with me. And that's what you want, right? The best way to evaluate a distributor is to get another good distributor to give them a testimonial. And if it happens to be somebody even better, okay? Now let's talk. This was sort of a long introduction to why we have to do evaluation. And now we're actually at the point of evaluation. Sorry, it took so long. The first thing I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to look to see um, what they do, right? Who they're selling, etc. I'm going to go online. I'm going to look at their website. A website will indicate because nowadays for $300 or $400 you can get a fantastic website built. And if they don't have a good website or they don't have a website at all, or they're just using a Facebook page or something like that, that is a very, very bad indicator. Um, Somebody told me recently, which is a great idea, is to check how long they've had their domain, right? Something that I learned years ago in a great course, this goes back almost 30 years ago, is when was their company incorporated? Because very often you're working with a company and they say, well, the legal name of the corporation is Acme Corporation 2025. And what that typically means is that there was an Acme Corporation 2024 and they closed it down and started 2025. And if they're doing that every year, that's a little fishy, right? Why are they doing that? Are they doing that to avoid paying debts? Are they doing that to avoid legal problems? Do they have a legal problem with a customer? Or do they have a legal problem with a principal, right? Why? So you can find that out very quickly if you do just a quick online search. So you take a look at their website, you take a look at their LinkedIn profiles, right? Are they active on LinkedIn? What are they saying on LinkedIn? What are people saying about them? How many connections do they have? Um, do you see anything negative about that type of thing, right? How long have they had their domain name? How long has the company been in operation? You can find out a lot from a very, very basic search like that in a matter of minutes, probably. But I typically, when I'm dealing with a new distributor, I'll probably spend a couple of hours sort of looking into anything that I can find about them online. If there's anything in the press, if they've done press releases, if shows they've been to, um, people we might know in common from LinkedIn, that kind of thing, right? So these are all, whoops, did something happen to my slide? Huh. Looks like, Melissa, did something get written on the screen? Okay, never mind.
I don't know. I saw for 1 second Byron's name popped up in the middle of the screen, but I'm not blaming it on you, Byron, at all. But I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. But anyway, it's slightly
Yep.
entertaining. I think we're
Yes, never
okay.
mind. Okay, no, there you go. Again, I will go into LinkedIn. If you're not familiar with Sales Navigator, you can get a really good idea of people who are connected to people. Like I said, a really good distributor very often used to sell for somebody else. So if he has a connection to a good manufacturer, that's a good indicator that he might have worked there and has connections there. A good distributor will have connections with government people, with end users, with all sorts of people. So when you get a feel for what that distributor's LinkedIn profile looks like, what that distributor's LinkedIn family looks like, who he's interacting with, and all of that, that is typically a really good indicator of the quality of the distributor. So I like to do that. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and Sales Navigator. I spend a lot of time looking for distributors, but I also spend a lot of time evaluating distributors. You know that a lot of people have testimonials and recommendations on LinkedIn. So if you go to the bottom of their profile, you'll see people who have recommended them, right? You'll see the schools they went to, that kind of thing. Now you can also get, we talk about distributors as the owner, right? But keep in mind, there are the salespeople. So you can go into a distributor and you can check out all their salespeople and see, what's going on with their salespeople, where they came from, how old they are, how long they've been there, what's the turnover. A distributor that has a lot of turnover in salespeople is probably not as good a distributor as a distributor that has less turnover. So there are things like that to keep track of, right? I will talk to other manufacturers. I'll reach out and just make a call to other sales VPs, sales leaders. So if a distributor is representing another line, I will get on not every line. Obviously, some distributors have a large number of lines. I'll probably call 3 other people and say, just tell me how they are to work with. Do they pay on time? Are they okay with the shipping? That kind of thing. And that usually is very, very effective. Getting news from somebody else, getting references from somebody else, getting their opinion. Especially somebody who is a solid sales leader and has been doing this for a while, that can be very effective and very helpful, right? Because sometimes you talk to people and they'll say, "Oh yeah, he's a great guy. I love him. He's a lot of fun, but boy, he has not sold anything for me for the past 3 years." And I've heard that before. Or they'll say, "Yeah, I keep asking him to give me information about his funnel, and he hasn't. He hasn't updated his funnel reports. He never shows up to meetings, that kind of thing." And you really do want to avoid that, right? You're looking to get, if you can, you're looking to get better people rather than less good people, right? Okay, so we've sort of talked about all these different things that are important to us that we want to evaluate, right? Are they a good fit for the right market? Okay. Are they do they really understand and sell to the right decision-making unit? Okay. Do they fit the ideal distributor profile? Do they understand the purchasing process of the end users we want to sell to, right? Do they sell the right complementary products that we would like them to, right? Are they selling products that we think are we a good fit for their portfolio, right? And do they have the proper level of bandwidth to cover the market that we want them to? Okay, so these are all the things we're trying to figure out. Okay. We can go and visit their office, right? And I'll tell you what, to be honest, Since COVID, I have done that less than I used to, but I used to physically walk around the office of every distributor I ever worked with. And now I'd say it's down to about a third of the time. But I think that's really important because it does give you a huge feeling. You get, it's sort of like you walk to a place and it's sloppy or dirty or the papers look like they're out of place. It gives you a feel for their discipline, right? If it's really, really quiet, it gives you a feel for the amount of business. Um, and this will sound a little bit funny, but I've been doing this for a very long time. A while back, I went, my chairman, I was working for a company, it was actually the last full-time job I had before I started my business. I was working for this company, and the chairman got very, very excited about this company. And I went to visit the company, and they had like a snack station in the office. And that snack station had fresh fruit and all sorts of other stuff. And it had a barista, like there was a full-time employee in that company who all that person did was make coffee and cold drinks for the staff. And there were about 30 to 40 salespeople, about 10 admins, and a barista. And I said to my chairman, I said, the cost of this is really high, which means they need to be taking a margin, a very high margin on our product for this to be worthwhile for them. They have to pay for that barista. They have to pay for those snacks. And he laughed at me. But sure enough, we ended up almost immediately getting into an argument with them because they wanted a lot. They wanted to raise their prices higher than any of our other distributors. They wanted a lot more margin. And in the end of the day, the company actually went bankrupt. And it was a new company with investment from a rich guy. So it wasn't even like it was a 20-year-old distributorship that had evolved this way. It was some guy opened up an office. And now that issue of having a barista might seem like a little thing, but that's the type of detail that you catch when you walk into an office, right? I'll tell you another story about working with a distributor that I inherited, which is a similar type of thing. It's a story where I went with my distributor, and I was very concerned that he didn't have enough bandwidth and he wasn't covering his market. So we go to a customer and he says to me on the way, he goes, this is one of my most important customers. He represents more sales to this one customer than anybody else, blah, blah, blah. He's talking about it. We get there and he says that my distributor says, wow, you look fantastic. And the guy says, oh, yeah, I've lost about 50 kilos. I had bariatric surgery. And we talk and talk. And then as we're leaving, I said to my distributor, I said, so he's one of your most important customers. He goes, yeah, yeah. I said, how often do you go? He goes, oh, because he's so important, I probably go on a monthly basis to see him and we talk. I said, look, you can't lose 50 kilos in a month, right? No matter what you did. So I'm guessing it's been a year since you've actually seen him. And he said, well, you know what? Actually, yeah, it's been about a year because I'm very busy. And I said, look, he's one of your most important customers, and you're not visiting, you're not seeing him enough. You have to improve that, right? So this is a good indicator. When you get out and you actually see what's going on, you're going to evaluate better. Like I said before, testimonials, right? You can get more testimonials for people. You can check to see what people are saying about it. Okay. Now, this is another thing that I like to do. I like to bring in people from my company if I'm evaluating a distributor. Now, I'll say this very, very clearly. I always go first, right? I want to make sure that my distributor can sell. And that's all I care about in the beginning. So I basically say, does he fit the ideal distributor profile? Can he sell? Is he covering the right market? Does he have the right bandwidth? I want to make sure all of that is covered. Once that is covered, then I want to say, okay, does he have the financial wherewithal to work with us and cover us? So I might have somebody come in from accounting, finance, etc. to look at it. And the flip side of that is going to be operational. Now, I have occasionally brought in somebody from finance and somebody from operations, but usually it's one or the other. And the idea here is to sort of double check me. It could be somebody who really, really knows how to sell, but might not be financially stable, or it could be somebody who really, really knows how to sell, but doesn't know how to deliver. And if delivery is important, then I need somebody who can help us figure out if they know how to deliver or not. Now, maybe they're so good at selling that I will say, okay, we're going to help them figure out the delivery better, right? We'll tell them who to hire, we'll tell them who to train. If my finance guy says they're fishy, no matter how good they are at selling, I got to cut bait. I got to say, okay, this is not the right company to work with because they might not have the financial wherewithal. They might have, sometimes you look at the distributor and they owe money to somebody for years, or they're not paying their bills, or there's some problem with them legally. They're involved in multiple court cases, right? And I've worked with principals of companies where their distributor just doesn't pay them. They've shipped product and now they're screwed. So you want to know in advance if there's a problem like that. And that might not be something that you as the VP of sales or the director of sales can identify that easily. I'm going to talk in a second about tools you can also use. But to begin with, having somebody come in from your company who can really evaluate those things, it's also not a bad thing to have a second pair of eyes on everybody. Okay. And what are we looking for? Well, we're looking to see that they're financially stable and that they have the operational excellence that we need for them. Now, it really depends on your product. Some products require no installation, no service, right? Some products require a lot. Some products, you really need to have a 6-hour response time to get there for service. So you have to figure out what you need for your product. But you're looking into that operational excellence. And personally, as much as I've sold, as much as I've worked with manufacturers and distributors all over the world, I do not believe that I can identify if a company has the proper level of operational excellence, right? Financial stability, maybe I feel a little bit more comfortable with, but still, those type of things people could be hiding. So having somebody from finance and somebody from operations take a look is not a bad thing. Now, I haven't touched until now. A lot of you have worked with the Department of Commerce or the EDPNC for finding distributors. And I haven't talked about that. That is a definite option, right? You can get great help from these people. In terms of evaluating distributors, they can do a fantastic job for you. The Department of Commerce will run a credit check for you. They will check to see if there are any lawsuits open against your distributor. They can check if there's anything like the Better Business Bureau, if there are complaints. Department of Commerce can do all of that for you for a very reasonable fee. And the EDPNC can do a similar thing too. So that's a good way to use these government resources, is especially to identify those type of problems. Now, again, if you say, do you think you can check to see if they have a warehouse? They said they had a warehouse. Can you check if they have a warehouse? That's the type of thing. Usually there are legal records that can identify that type of thing. So when you come up and you say, these are a list of operational needs I have, these are a list of the financial needs I have, the Department of Commerce, the Federal Department of Commerce, as well as the EDPNC, they can help you with those probably better than anybody like me or anybody in your company can figure those things out. Okay, so going back, like I said, there are the 3 elements of a distributor. Okay, competency, engagement, and bandwidth. And we've evaluated them. We've looked at them. We've gone into we've put together what exactly we've looking for. We've put together that ideal distributor profile. We have figured out what they should be selling, what the bandwidth requirement is, all of that. And now We've talked to them. We've talked to people they're working with already. We've dug into their financials. We've dug into their operational excellence. We've hopefully talked to a few of their customers. Okay. We've gone along with them on ride-alongs. Okay. And all of these type of things will help us decide. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put together a chart. So let's say I'm going into a market and I have 3 potential distributors. I'm going to make the reason I came up with this chart originally was to evaluate distributors. So I'm going to put together a chart and I'm going to say distributor A falls in a certain place in terms of engagement. They fall in a certain place in terms of competency, and their footprint, their bandwidth is a certain size. And I will do this for everybody I want to work with. And this will give me a really good graphic indicator of what I'm, who I should be working with, right? And again, let's go back to what I said. Bandwidth, you can't really change, okay? Engagement will drive competency. So if I talk to them and I think, wow, these are people who really want to work with me, that I'm a good fit for their model, I'm a good fit for where they want to grow. Now I know that they will invest a little bit of time in driving up their competency, but they do need the basic competencies that are related to what I'm looking for. Okay, so now I've interviewed people, I've put together a chart, and now basically I know where I am. To this week, it looks like we are going to stop. We're going to end a little early. I aim at not finishing early, but it looks like today just did not stretch out as much as I like. So everybody's going to get a little bit of time free, but I hope we have some questions in the chat and or questions people want to raise or anything like that. Happy to do that.
Oh yeah, so Crystal chimed in. So I put in the chat, Zach, that when you mentioned U.S. Commercial Service and EDPNC, a little bit of information. Crystal, do you want to go ahead and talk for a minute or two about the international company profile? I see that you put a link to some information in the chat, but do you want to go ahead and say a
Oh,
couple of
yeah.
things?
Sure, sure. And thank you so much for inviting me to this. Thank you for letting me speak on this. I'll share my video. With the international company profile, it's again, it's like a background check. It's going to be like Zach said, it's going to be part of your process when you're doing your vetting. You'll let the distributor or your partner know that this is part of your process. So that way they will share more information with us. And then what they'll do, and then you get to choose whether you want a full international company profile or a partial. With the partial, it's mainly we just check the internet. And when you're looking overseas, there's more things that they can do overseas than we can do from here when they're checking the internet, because it's their internet and they know it better than we do. And then, but then when you have a full, like you were saying, Melissa, they'll go and speak to them. They'll try to get, our folks will go visit. They will ask questions. They'll try to get financials. They'll try to get as much documentation as they can. And then ultimately, they compile all the information they get. They'll give you a report, and the report is to help you make a business decision on whether or not you are going to work with that company. So just to be clear that what we do is help you get information. We won't tell you, yes, work with this company, or no, don't work with this company. We give you the information so you can decide.
Great. Thanks, Crystal. And I want to backtrack with a proper introduction. Those that are not familiar with the U.S. Commercial Service, it's wonderful that the state of North Carolina has representatives from this federal government agency that sole mission is to support U.S. businesses in myriad ways with international outreach and international business. So, Crystal, about how big is your team? In North Carolina.
In North Carolina,
Right, in
it's
North Carolina.
5. I think
Okay,
it's
so there's
5.
5, right. And so they are divided by industry. So Crystal, if you would be comfortable putting your email in the chat, those that are live can reach out. If there's somebody that's watching this recording after the fact, then Crystal, what do you suggest people do to reach out to you if they're watching the recording without being able to see the chat?
Okay, no problem. Crystal.mills@trade.gov. Crystal is spelled CRYSTAL.MILLS@trade.gov. Yep.
Great. And then what are the approximate costs for that type of service from the federal government?
Oh, good question, good question, good
I'm
question.
thinking it was about $750. It's under $1,000 for
Yeah, I think
next.
I think it's between 750 and 900. Somebody told me it went up to 900, but the last time I did it, I think it was 700. So.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
reasonable to vet a potential
It
partner that's going to be a permanent partner, right?
right.
exactly.
For a full profile, it's 700, and then for a partial, it's $150. These are for small companies. I'm just quoting the small company fee.
Yeah. And then from an EDPNC perspective, for those markets that we have covered with private sector international trade consultants here from the state of North Carolina operations, EDPNC, which is all the countries in Europe, Mexico, and Canada, they're able to do that in-market online research on a company's background at no cost for you, but we are able to cover a more limited scope of the globe. And Crystal services with the U.S. Commercial Service are at embassies that well cover the globe. So most of your markets they'll be able to do for you. So that's our tool component of the discussion. How about some questions? Zach, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. There's so much to consider. So folks that are on the line, we keep this as a meeting format so that we can have these discussions rather than just a strict webinar format where that's not possible. So either type in the chat or come on screen and ask a question. Zach is full of knowledge, so feel free to get his opinion on even specific situations if you would like.
Yeah, I know this may be maybe the driest of subjects that I'm going to cover in this webinar series, but it is really important. My email, I'll put it in the chat. You can also find me very easily on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you're typing it in the chat, Zach. And for those of you that are watching this after the fact, it's Zach, Z-A-C-H. Zach's last name is Selch, S-E-L-C-H. And his email is Zach, Z-A-C-H, at globalsalesmentor.com.
Yeah.
And can you tell them,
I'll
what
tell
the
you,
process, just in general, what the process is if they want to have, a little chat with you, how
oh
that.
yeah, so first of all, I'm contracted with the state of North Carolina with if you'd like reach out to Melissa or Mark or Michael, I'm sorry, Melissa or Michael, and ask to talk to me, or you can just reach out to me. I'll give you some time. I pretty much anybody who reaches out to me, I'll chat with you and give you a little bit of time and talk with you. What we didn't mention today is North Carolina has basically purchased my course, which is I really don't think there's anything like it available anyplace else in the world. It's a 40-hour video course on international sales, and it's free to you guys. You have to ask for access from one of the people from North Carolina. But once they give me permission, I will give you a login and you can come in, and at your free time, you can access all the courses. There's lots and lots of information. Aside from that, you go to my, if you go to my website, Global Sales Mentor, you'll find dozens and dozens of pieces of free literature. So Howard, I did 2 different sessions already on finding distributors. So what I'd suggest is this: if you maybe reach out to Melissa, you can get access to the recorded sessions and to the notes. And I have an ebook on finding distributors. And she can get you all of that, or you can reach out to me. And if you reach out to me by email, or you reach out to me and set up a meeting through my website or through LinkedIn, it's really easy to set up a meeting with me. I'll make sure that you get the material and we can talk through it. I mean, I literally spoke close to 3 hours on finding new distributors for this webinar session, and all of that's recorded. So if it doesn't answer your question, I'm happy to talk to you and work with you,
Yeah,
because
and that probably would be a good cue. So Howard, if it would let's just make sure that you get those links, and after you watch the sessions, kind of take notes, like where the gaps are for you, questions that you'd like to engage Zach on, and then we'll set up a separate sidebar for that. So because I'm about to schedule a lot of meetings for Howard, so we'll have you kind of lead me on when you're ready for that. So that's great. Thanks for chiming in and for attending. While we're waiting to see if anyone else has a question, I'll take this opportunity to talk about some upcoming events that EDPNC is hosting, including the upcoming Zach Selch follow-on webinars. I'll hit on those first. So on July 16th, the next session is new international partners. It's about best practices for setting expectations and crafting agreements with these new international partners. So Zach's going to take it to the next level once you have found a partner, how to go about crafting that. Actually, Zach, why don't you articulate the
yeah,
in
and I'll tell
sessions?
you,
You'll do a better job, and then I'll jump back in with the EDPNC ones.
yeah, no problem. Actually, so that session, to be really honest, the evaluation session is sort of dry. It's important material, but it's hard to make entertaining. Onboarding distributors is really one of those things that is going to dramatically influence your sales over the next period of time, right? The better you onboard your distributor, the better they're going to perform for the lifetime that you work with that distributor. So the next session is really going to dig into how do you make sure they start off strong? And that's a really interesting session. When I've done that for other organizations, that I get a lot of really positive feedback on that, including from people who are very experienced, because everybody finds problems with that, right? They feel that they don't do it very well. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to set expectations from the beginning, but also how to start that training immediately so that everybody is engaged and competent and accountable from day one. So you don't have to look back, 7 years later and say, wow, my distributors aren't performing as well as I'd like them to be.
Great. And then we have a couple of others after that. In August, you'll be talking about the International Distributor Management. And then in September, trade shows. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, exactly. So the management, again, to be really frank, most of my clients are not new to this. Most of my clients have been running distribution organizations for years, and where they really need help is in getting their distributors to perform better, right? To drive more sales. So what we're going to talk about in August is an ongoing management system to get the most out of your distributors on the long term, right? How do you get them to perform best? And then the last session in this series, we're going to talk about trade shows. And everybody loves trade shows, but again, there's a huge difference between doing a trade show well and doing a trade show poorly in terms of the revenue that it produces for you. And we're going to talk really best practices. I've done hundreds and hundreds of trade shows over the years in 50 countries. We're going to really talk about best practices and how to get the best results out of a trade show.
Love it. Sounds great. For those of you that might be in the Charlotte area, next week on it does say June 25th. Michael March, by the way, is our newest member of the EDPNC International Trade Team. He just put his email and he's waving to you. Michael March is covering automotive, marine, and we're figuring out the rest of his portfolio. But he also has decades of international sales experience. So just please know that he's on the team and reach out to him if those are your industries. But next week, we have an event that my colleague Mike Ryan organized that's called Unlocking Business Growth, the North Carolina, Mexico, Canada Advantage. So he has gathered people from all of these markets to speak in the Charlotte area. That information is on the website. That's an in-person event. I thought it was June 26th, but it's showing up as June 25th. So my apologies on that, Michael.
Melissa, it was originally scheduled and then we got a location for it, so we moved it to the 25th.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you, Cheryl. We have an export education event on June 26th, which is a webinar, Export 201 topic. So this is Mike Alaka, who many of you have seen, that's guiding us through a lot of this red tape involved with export compliance. And so he's digging into some more advanced topics to keep everyone aware of what they should be doing. We also have the Go Global Roadshow. Cheryl, our grant manager and really the glue for our team, since you are on, can you tell people about the Go Global Roadshow?
Sure. So, as mentioned, we have 3 international offices, one in Mexico, Canada, and one that covers all of Europe. Once a year, they come over, they send a rep over once a year, and we get in a van and we travel throughout the state to certain locations. And it gives North Carolina companies the ability to schedule one-on-one consultations with up to 2 of those markets. We also sponsor a networking luncheon from 12 to 2 each day. And that's where all of our export partners join also. So in our foreign markets, we'll give updates on their market. And it's just a real good opportunity to immerse yourself, whether you're new to exporting or whether you've been exporting for a while, and have access to all of our partners in one room.
Great. Thank you. And then you can reach out to Michael's email in the chat or mine if you want more information on that. The last event that I'll bring up for the day, unless a colleague or Zach tells me otherwise, is August 6th, which is an export coffee talk about unlocking North Carolina resources for global growth specific to the North Carolina Community College Systems Economic Development Program. So they are going to cover about 4 or 5 specific programs that support North Carolina manufacturers, including NC Edge, customized training, apprenticeship programs, bio network, and others. So you can join us for that. Zach, I'm going to hand it back to you. And if anyone is left on the line with a question, feel free.
Yeah, if anybody has a question, please pop it up. Feel free to reach out to me. I will get notes out on this in the next few days. Like I said, I'm actually on vacation, so it might take me a couple days to get notes out, but certainly by next week, you'll get the notes from this. And I hope you'll join us for the next session.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for your expertise, Zach. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm going to stop.